I stood at the foot of the hill, staring up at the house that had been my anchor through life's turbulence. The two-story cottage, cradled by a canopy of pine trees, looked almost untouched by time. This was the place I had escaped to in my mind during countless sleepless nights, the sanctuary I'd imagined whenever the weight of the world bore down on me. Yet now, as I stood before it, a strange sense of foreboding gnawed at the edges of my excitement. It was subtle at first, like an itch you can't quite locate. Something about the stillness in the air, the way the shadows stretched long and unbroken across the ground, unsettled me. I tried to shake it off. After all, this was my home. How could it be anything but safe? I knocked on the familiar wooden door, and within seconds, it opened. Andrew. Emily's voice was exactly as I remembered, soft and warm, like the first spring breeze after a harsh winter. She stood there, her smile radiant, her auburn hair catching the faint glow of the porch light. For a moment, the world felt right again. I stepped into her embrace, and the years melted away. "You're finally here," she murmured, holding me close. "Yeah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm home." But as soon as I stepped inside, the warmth of her hug gave way to something colder. "Andrew." Another voice called out from the living room. I turned to see Liam, my younger brother, leaning casually against the doorway, a glass of wine in hand. His grin was as wide as ever, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. Something sharp, almost assessing. "Liam," I said, my surprise genuine. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Where else would I be?" he replied with a laugh, crossing the room to pull me into a hug. "While you were off doing who knows. Someone had to help Emily keep this place standing." I glanced at Emily, who smiled faintly, but didn't speak. A flicker of unease surfaced again. Why hadn't Liam mentioned any of this in his letters? Dinner that night was everything I dreamed of. Emily's cooking, my parents' laughter, Liam's endless stories. We toasted to my return, clinking glasses and exchanging memories. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged, like I was part of something bigger than myself. But that's the thing about perfect moments. They rarely are what they seem. Looking around the table, I saw only love and happiness. My wife, my parents, my brother. Each of them seemed to glow with sincerity. Yet beneath the surface of their joy lay something I couldn't quite grasp. A quiet undercurrent, barely noticeable, but impossible to ignore. After dinner, Emily led me upstairs. The room looked exactly as I remembered, down to the neatly folded quilt at the foot of the bed. "You should get some rest," she said, her voice soothing. "It's been a long day." I nodded, watching her move with practiced ease, as though the years apart had never happened. "If you need anything, just call me," she added, placing a hand on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, reassuring. "Thanks," I said, forcing a smile. "I'm fine." She kissed me lightly on the cheek and left, closing the door behind her. For a moment, I lay there, letting the silence settle around me. But as the minutes ticked by, the unease that had been lurking all day began to grow. It wasn't the kind of fear you can explain. It wasn't tied to any sound or sight. It was deeper, like an instinct screaming to be heard. "Stop overthinking," I muttered to myself, closing my eyes. But the unease stayed with me, whispering that not everything in this house was as it seemed. And deep down, I knew it was right. The next morning, I woke to sunlight filtering through the sheer curtains, painting soft patterns on the walls. Outside, birds chirped in a cheerful rhythm, and the faint aroma of freshly brewed coffee drifted into the room. For the first time in years, I felt an overwhelming sense of calm. Stretching in bed, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, life was finally giving me a break. I made my way downstairs and saw Emily at the stove. She was humming softly, her auburn hair catching the light as she moved. She wore a loosely tied robe, and the casual intimacy of the scene momentarily froze me in place. "Good morning, Andrew," she said, smiling warmly as she turned toward me. "Good morning," I replied, stepping forward to pull her into a hug. Her embrace was warm, grounding me in the moment, and for a second, all my unease from the night before seemed absurd. Then Liam entered the kitchen, breaking the illusion. "Well, look who's up," he said with a grin, sliding into a chair at the table. "We were just saying you should take it easy today. You deserve it." There was nothing in his tone that should have raised alarms, yet I found myself scrutinizing him. He seemed too comfortable, too settled in a place that wasn't his. "You and Emily have been planning my day already?" I asked, my voice light but probing. "Of course," Liam said, flashing an easy smile. "We've had plenty of time to talk while you were gone." The casual way he said it sent a pang of irritation through me. I didn't reply, instead focusing on the plate Emily placed in front of me. The day passed uneventfully. Emily suggested we take a walk around the property, and Liam joined us, weaving his humor into every conversation. Emily held my hand, her touch reassuring, while Liam's presence gnawed at me. The longer I watched him, the more I noticed subtle things. His familiarity with the house, the way he looked at Emily when he thought I wasn't paying attention. By afternoon, my parents left, and the house grew quieter. Emily and I spent the evening in the living room, her head resting on my shoulder as we watched the fire crackle. Liam claimed he was turning in early, but I could hear his footsteps above us, deliberate and restless. "Why do you keep looking up there?" Emily asked softly. "Just getting used to everything again," I lied. She nestled closer. "You're home now. Everything's fine." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let her words wrap around me like a shield. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to hum with secrets, every creak of the floorboards and rustle of the wind outside pressing on my nerves. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every interaction, every word exchanged since my return. When I couldn't take it anymore, I got up to get a glass of water. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed a faint light glowing from the kitchen. Curious, I crept toward it and stopped in the doorway. Emily was sitting at the table, her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, but the words she spoke were like daggers. "He doesn't suspect a thing. Yes, it's all going as planned. No, not yet. We just need more time." My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen in the shadows. Who was she talking to? What was this plan? When she ended the call and turned around, her eyes widened in surprise. "Andrew, you startled me." "Sorry," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I couldn't sleep. Were you talking to someone?" She hesitated, just for a second, before answering. "Oh, it was just Claire checking in. She wanted to see how you were doing." Her explanation sounded plausible, but something about her tone made me doubt her. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll head back to bed." She stepped forward, wrapping her arms around me. "Everything's fine, Andrew," she whispered. "You're home. That's all that matters." I nodded, but her words felt hollow. The next morning, Liam was already at the table, chatting animatedly with Emily as though nothing had happened. She served breakfast with her usual warmth, placing a stack of pancakes in front of me. "Andrew, you look distracted," she said, her brow furrowed in concern. "I'm fine," I replied, managing a weak smile. But I wasn't fine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I watched them carefully, their movements, their smiles, their seemingly innocent exchanges. They thought I wasn't paying attention, but I was. And soon, I would uncover the truth. I couldn't take it anymore. The days spent in the house that was supposed to be my sanctuary had turned into an unrelenting labyrinth of doubt and suspicion. What started as fleeting glances, vague answers, and hushed tones had become a suffocating storm I could no longer ignore. That night, I made my decision. No more lying awake, convincing myself everything was fine. I needed answers, and I was going to get them. The house was silent as I crept down the stairs, each step deliberate and soundless. A faint glow spilled into the hallway from the study door, slightly ajar. As I approached, voices reached my ears, low, urgent, and unmistakably conspiratorial. "It's too dangerous," Liam said, his voice taut. "You're overreacting," Emily replied sharply. "Everything is under control. He hasn't figured anything out." My blood ran cold. There was no mistaking who they were talking about. My wife and my brother were hiding something from me. Without thinking, I shoved the door open. The sharp bang echoed through the room as the door slammed against the wall. Emily and Liam froze, their faces pale and wide-eyed. What the hell is going on here? I demanded, my voice cold and razor-sharp. Emily's attempt at a smile faltered. Andrew, you scared me. What are you doing up? I didn't move. I asked you a question. What are you two talking about? Liam stood, smoothing his shirt as if to defuse the tension. Relax, Andrew. We were just discussing family matters. Family matters? I echoed, stepping into the room. The kind of matters you conveniently leave me out of? Come on, you're being paranoid, Liam said with a forced chuckle. Don't lie to me, Liam. My voice dropped lower, trembling with anger. I've seen the looks, heard the whispers. What the hell are you two hiding from me? Emily stood, wringing her hands nervously. It's not what you think, Andrew. Please calm down. Then explain it, I snapped, my eyes locking onto hers. Make me understand. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Liam stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. You've been away too long, Andrew, he said smoothly. Everything feels unfamiliar. You're jumping to conclusions. Jumping to conclusions? I laughed bitterly. When I hear my wife say, he hasn't figured anything out? What exactly am I not supposed to figure out, Liam? Liam stayed silent, his face hardening. Well, I pressed, taking a step toward him. You always think you're the clever one. So, explain. Emily moved to stand between us. Andrew, it's not what it sounds like, she pleaded. Then what is it? I shouted. Tell me. Her hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. It started when you left, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. What started? I demanded, my fists clenching. Liam put a hand on her shoulder, as if to steady her. Andrew, she was alone. You were gone for years. She needed someone. His words hit me like a physical blow. And you were that someone? I asked, my voice ice cold. Liam didn't answer. Emily looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. Answer me. I roared. Did you sleep with my wife while I was out there risking my life? The silence that followed was deafening. It was a mistake, Emily whispered, her voice cracking. A mistake? I repeated, my anger boiling over. 3 years of betrayal, and you call it a mistake? Liam stepped forward, his tone defensive. You don't understand, Andrew. You were gone. We didn't know if you'd ever come back. We had to move on. Move on? I stared at him, the pain and fury twisting in my chest. You think this is how you move on? By betraying your own brother? Emily sobbed, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her anymore. You knew I would come back, I said, my voice shaking with emotion. You knew I was fighting to survive, to return to you. And this is what I come home to? I didn't know what to do. Emily cried out, her voice raw. You left me here, Andrew. You left me alone. Her words only deepened the chasm between us. I turned away from them, my vision blurred by tears of rage and heartbreak. On the stairs, I felt the weight of their betrayal pressing down on me. The life I had fought so hard to return to had been hollowed out, leaving only pain and bitterness in its place. In my room, I sat on the edge of the bed, burying my face in my hands. I felt shattered, betrayed by the two people I had trusted most. But as the pain settled, something else began to take its place. Determination. They thought I would crumble, that I would leave quietly or accept their lies. But they underestimated me. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I woke early the next morning, but even sleep couldn't dull the ache of betrayal that had taken root in my chest. The events of the previous night replayed in my mind relentlessly, each word spoken by Emily and Liam cutting deeper with every replay. But it wasn't just them. What haunted me more was the silence of my parents. Why hadn't they said anything? Why had they stood by, complicit in this mess? Breakfast was an exercise in restraint. The silence around the table was thick and stifling. Every glance exchanged between Emily and Liam sharpening my suspicion. They announced mid-meal that they had errands to run. Don't get too bored while we're gone, Andrew, Emily said, wrapping her arms around me in a hollow show of affection. I let her hug me, unmoving, my body cold to her touch. Liam, ever the picture of casual confidence, clapped me on the shoulder as they left. "We'll be back soon, brother. Try to relax," he said with a grin, as if mocking the turmoil brewing inside me. I watched their car disappear down the road, my mind already set on what I needed to do. The first step was to find out just how deep this betrayal ran. I headed upstairs to the guest room where my parents always left their belongings when visiting. Their bag sat in the corner, unassuming, but it called to me. Opening it felt like crossing a line I could never return from. At first, I found nothing unusual: clothes, toiletries, a book. But then my father's tablet caught my eye. He'd never been one for passwords, a habit I had always warned him about. I turned it on and opened his email. The contents of one particular thread stopped me cold. "Emily's right. He won't figure it out. We need to stand by them. It's for the best." Liam did what needed to be done while Andrew was gone. I reread the message until the words blurred. My parents knew. They had known everything, and not only had they stayed silent, they had taken sides. Another email, this one from my mother to Emily, read, "Don't worry, dear. If Andrew starts asking questions, stay calm. Liam has always been reliable, and will support you both no matter what. Family comes first." My hand shook as I closed the tablet. Family comes first? Was that supposed to include me, or had I been discarded the moment I left? I put everything back where I'd found it and stepped outside to clear my head. The crisp morning air did little to soothe the storm inside me. Staring out at the horizon, I tried to piece together a plan. They had chosen to betray me, every single one of them. If they wanted to conspire behind my back, I would turn their own game against them. Returning inside, I went down to the basement where my old army belongings were stored. Among the crates of tools and gear was a notebook I hadn't opened in years. I flipped to a blank page and began writing. 1. Emily, restrict access to joint accounts. She's grown accustomed to a comfortable life. Let's see how she fares without it. 2. Liam, gather leverage. His job and reputation are his weak points, and I know exactly how to exploit them. 3. Parents, confront and expose their complicity. This wasn't going to be quick, and it wasn't going to be easy, but I was prepared for the long haul. The first step was to convince them all that I had accepted the situation. That night at dinner, I forced myself to act normal. "You seem more at ease today, Andrew," Emily remarked, pouring me a glass of wine. "Just adjusting," I said with a small smile. Liam leaned back in his chair, grinning. "That's good. We all just want you to feel at home again." I nodded, masking my simmering rage with feigned indifference. They thought I was broken, but nothing could be further from the truth. Later that night, when the house was silent, I returned to the guest room. Opening the tablet again, I took screenshots of every incriminating email. Evidence was power, and I intended to collect as much as possible. My search led me to Emily's financial emails. I discovered she'd been quietly transferring money into an account under her name. "Clever," I muttered, "but not clever enough." I logged into our joint account and changed the settings. Now, she couldn't access a dime without my approval. Let her feel what it was like to lose control. The next day, I visited Liam's office under the guise of wanting to meet his boss. During the conversation, I casually mentioned a few incidents from Liam's past that might raise eyebrows if they came to light. His boss seemed surprised but intrigued. "Just looking out for my little brother," I said with a friendly smile as I left. Now, it was a waiting game. The hardest part was confronting my parents. I didn't want to hurt them, but their betrayal cut just as deep as Emily's and Liam's. I needed answers. I called my mother that evening. "Can you and Dad come by tomorrow? We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Of course, Andrew," she replied, her tone concerned. They would come, and when they did, I would force the truth out of them. Piece by piece, I would unravel their lies and expose the cracks in their carefully constructed facade. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I would crumble under the weight of their betrayal. But they were wrong. They thought they were untouchable, that I would forgive, forget, or simply surrender to the situation. But revenge isn't about anger. It's about precision. It doesn't rush. It waits. It calculates. I watched them unravel day by day, their confidence turning to unease, their smugness crumbling into fear. This wasn't a single blow. It was a slow, deliberate reckoning. Emily's world began to collapse first. The morning after I restricted access to our joint accounts, I overheard her on the phone with the bank. Her tone shifted from polite confusion to outright panic. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "I need access to this account immediately." I listened from the next room, a quiet satisfaction settling over me. No one on the other end could help her, and she knew it. At first, she tried to maintain her composure. She started cooking at home instead of ordering takeout, skipped her usual salon appointments, and avoided her friends. I watched her spiral in silence, each small adjustment chipping away at her pride. Within weeks, she began selling her possessions. It started small, a few necklaces, some designer shoes. But soon, the desperation grew. Her handbag, her anniversary ring, and finally, her car. All gone. One evening, as the weight of her new reality bore down on her, she broke. "Andrew," she said, her voice trembling as she stood in the living room, "we need to talk." I looked up from my book. "About what?" "You know what," she said, her hands gripping the back of a chair. "Why are you doing this?" "Why?" I set the book down and met her eyes. "Do you really want the answer?" She hesitated, and in that silence, I saw her understand. There was no return to her old life. Liam held out longer, his arrogance shielding him from the cracks forming beneath him. But his fall was louder. A week after I sent the incriminating evidence to his employer, an internal investigation began. I watched him unravel as the days went by. His easy charm gave way to irritability, his laughter replaced by tense silences and frustrated phone calls. "It's just a misunderstanding," he muttered over dinner one night. "They have nothing." But they did. When he was fired, he came home late, dropping his briefcase at the door and collapsing onto the couch. "They didn't even give me a chance to explain," he said bitterly. I sat across from him, watching. "Maybe they didn't need to," I said evenly. His glare was sharp, but behind it was defeat. In the weeks that followed, Liam's attempts to rebuild were futile. Whispers of his dishonest practices followed him wherever he went. I made sure of that. One night, I found him in the garage, sitting on the floor with an empty bottle of whiskey in his hand. "You knew this would happen," he slurred, not even looking up. I crouched down beside him. "I did, and you earned it." The hardest part of my plan was confronting my parents. They hadn't been active participants in the betrayal, but their silence was its own form of complicity. When they arrived at my invitation, I greeted them with a calmness I didn't feel. "We need to talk," I said, leading them to the living room. They sat across from me, tension etched into their faces. "Andrew, what's going on?" my mother asked cautiously. "What's going on," I said, my voice cold, "is that you chose a side." My mother flinched. "You're talking about Emily and Liam," I interrupted. You knew they betrayed me, and you said nothing." "We didn't want to make things worse," she began, her voice trembling. "Worse for who?" I snapped. "For them? For your perfect little family?" My father sighed heavily, unable to meet my gaze. "We thought it would work itself out. We didn't want to lose you or them." I laughed bitterly. "And yet, here we are." My mother's tears began to fall, but I felt nothing for her. "You've lost me," I said, standing. "I hope they were worth it." After that conversation, I cut them off. They tried to reach out, calls, letters, messages through mutual friends, but I ignored them all. Their punishment was the realization that they had lost their son. Emily's life continued to crumble. She moved out months later, unable to withstand the pressure. Her comfortable world had collapsed, leaving her to start from nothing. Liam became a pariah. His career was ruined, his friends abandoned him, and he drowned himself in alcohol to numb the shame. My parents, who had clung to their dream of a united family, watched it dissolve into ashes. They had hoped to hold on to everyone, but in the end, they lost me. And me? I stood by the window of the empty house, watching the sunset paint the sky. I wasn't happy, but I was free, and in that freedom, I found my victory.